If you're anything like me, you may have entered marriage thinking that you can change your spouse. Oh, you noticed some of their flaws back then, but you figured you'll be able to transform them once you're married. Isn't that our job, to help God transform them? I just read this research article that stated, when intimate relationships begin to get problematic, one partner tends to focus on changing the other. The end result is that at least one feels manipulated and both feel cheated. Our focus then becomes on changing our partner under the guise of getting my needs met. You know, God never guarantees us a happy marriage. In fact, He's much more interested in my character growth than in my temporary happiness here on earth. Our modern day view of marriage, that romantic feelings in my marriage are an essential aspect of true love, and without it, a couple aren't meant to be, isn't necessarily supported in Scripture. Marriage is a platform that God uses for His goals. It's part of His purposes for sanctification. Your spouse is the person in your life to give you opportunities to grow. So the bad news is that your spouse provides the chafing that smooths out your rough edges and makes you more Christ-like. God's sense of humor, right? Too many times we invest way too much energy trying to change our spouse, and that only leads to frustration, anger, and ongoing hurt. That gives way too much power and responsibility to my spouse. He now becomes the one in charge, my happiness and well-being. Not only does that make me powerless over my own life, but it places on him this impossible job that God never intended for him to have. Your focus needs to be on changing yourself and not your spouse, on what God is calling you to do in your marriage, not on how your spouse may be failing you. Remember, God will hold you accountable only for your end of your marriage, not for your spouse's actions or choices. Your response to your spouse is your responsibility and yours alone. But the good news is that you do have control over your capacity to be content regardless of the circumstances. We have a lot of control over our own hearts and well-being. And it starts with rooting ourselves in our intrinsic value as God's beloved son or daughter, recognizing that there is no one capable of loving us to the degree that we really long for. Remember, God knows all of the challenges you face and the hurts you experience at the hands of your spouse. Faithfulness, your faithfulness, is about persevering and choosing to obey in the daily life challenges, even when things are tough. Ultimately, your marriage is less about you and your spouse. It's actually more about you and Jesus Christ. It's more about your faith in Jesus than it is about your marriage. Now, we all have legitimate God-given emotional needs for love and safety. In fact, God built that in our hearts so that we would pursue a relationship with Him. But instead, in our desire to be loved, we expend much too much energy trying to find a good spouse. And then when we think we've found them, we plunk our unprotected hearts into their hands wholeheartedly, giving them the responsibility of caring for our hearts. And when they don't do an adequate job of caring for our hearts, we're devastated. And that's because we've given our unprotected hearts to another human being who's just not capable of handling our hearts with patience, love, tenderness, and all the attention it needs. Here's a truth I want you to hear. We are responsible for our own needs. This is a boundary issue, not just about stopping bad things from happening to me, but also taking responsibility for the good things I want to happen. When you do that, you're acting in ways that express your value to yourself and to God. Whenever you let someone have access to the most sensitive and vulnerable part of you, and they start getting careless, you must take back that part of yourself, at least for a time. If you see yourself as God sees you, valuable and precious, then you would have no intention of letting anything damage that. You would safeguard your value, much like you would safeguard a treasured possession, allowing nothing to damage it. When your spouse treats you badly, you may need to draw a line in the sand. Your ability to feel safe in a relationship depends much more on this than you realize. In real relationships, I know that my husband will have moments where he'll just forget and stop being trustworthy with my heart. I can live with that because there's always someone taking responsibility, and that's me. When other people act in unsafe ways, I take the most valuable part of myself back and I protect it. And when he regains his trustworthiness, I can say, let's try this again. What happens then is that my sense of well-being and worth isn't dependent on my husband's behavior. Sure, he'll still anger and hurt me, but I'll be resilient to handle the ups and downs of my marriage without losing the core of who I am and my sense of value. What this means is that even if you're in a difficult marriage, you can still be content and have a sense of well-being and purpose in your life. What this also means is that even in an abusive situation, you can protect your heart and make wise choices for your life, since your sense of worth and your identity isn't dependent on your spouse and their actions. This will help you to say no to actions on their part that are unacceptable and allow you to have a realistic view of your marriage and the choices you need to make.